There was a time when TV airtime traders were known as gorillas with calculators. That's an old-fashioned image, and it couldn't be further from the reality of ITV's Managing Director of Commercial, Kelly Williams. Kelly is one of the nicest, classiest, and highly respected executives in the UK television business. On this week's episode, Kelly talks about his early days in airtime sales at Thames Television and UK Gold, his move to Channel 5, and his current role at ITV, which has seen a dramatic rise in advertising revenue, as well as a cultural shift in the way business is done. Kelly shares his thoughts on how great sales teams are born out of challenging times, the increasing importance of technology in the advertising sales market, the influence of Nick Milligan in shaping his career, and why sometimes the only way is Wembley. Enjoy. Hi Kelly, welcome to the pod.
Hi Danny, thank you for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. I always start off with a fun question, and this is a variation of one that I've asked people before. Let's say you'd done a deal with the devil when you were a bit younger to have all you wanted in life, and in return, of course, for the devil's deal, which is for your soul. And now the devil has come to collect. Which buyer would you choose to negotiate on your behalf to get you out of the deal?
Oh, that's an easy one. There's a guy called Mark Collins, currently chairman of Group M, I think. And look, he's a good friend of mine. I've dealt with him for, well over 30 years, but he is by far the most capable negotiator I've ever come across. For quite low profile, to be honest, in our industry, but he is the power behind the Group M throne. I would definitely pick him.
Very good. Well, sounds like you're in good hands. So just talking about those early days and getting off to how things started out, you joined Thames, I think, around about 1988. How did you get started in TV advertising sales?
Well, of course, I've grown up all my life desperate to sell airtime. No, I probably like many people in the world that I work in, I had no idea this industry existed when I left kind of university. So I finished university, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to do that milk round, because I know I went for a few of those interviews, and I just thought that's not a job I want to do, working for one of those big accountancy firms or whoever was there. And I was just kind of bumming around, really, doing kind of a bit of manual labor and a bit of bar work and stuff. And suddenly I just saw this advert in a newspaper of all things. The Media Guardian was on a Monday. And there was just this advert for a television sales assistant at Thames TV. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting. And I applied for it and then got an interview and then, eventually got the job and arrived in this industry I didn't know existed. And and it was great fun. I arrived at a company that was just felt like it was full of lots of like-minded people. Yeah, it felt really, really good fun.
So as you know, I'm married to somebody who was there at the same time and immersed in that same sort of culture. I hear things from her perspective, but interested in your perspective about what a TV advertising sales operation was like at that time. Was it quite a robust place?
My memories of that time, and it was only 4 years I was there, and was that it was it was a work hard, play hard environment. That's what the industry was like. It was challenging, and look, it was 1988, so it was much more, I'd say, male dominated. The whole TV buying and selling industry, certainly the trading side, was full of egos and testosterone and all that kind of stuff. So there were often unpleasant conversations. I guess that the skill of everybody doing it was try and create win-wins, and I think the people who were good at buying and selling managed to do that. I felt like the culture at Thames was, maybe it was because we all worked for this this difficult leader. I think there was a real togetherness, there was a real team spirit, and again I think that's something I really learned early on in my career, that I think to be a really good sales team, that's something you want to try and build and create for the team, is that togetherness and that team spirit.
But also an interesting time because at that point, ITV was divided up into all these different franchises, all with their own sales teams. And so to some extent, you were actually competing against other parts of ITV to secure revenue. That must have been a little bit strange, particularly looking back now.
It was quite monopolistic in a way, in that yes, you competed against other ITV sales houses, but they were in different regions. So it didn't feel anywhere near as competitive as the world does today. Today, you not only compete against television companies, but the big global tech giants are really powerful, strong competitors. Whereas back then, television per se was by far and away it's not the only, but the strongest medium. It was the only audio-visual medium. And ITV, because they also sold Channel 4 at the time, pretty much had a monopoly. So the thing that you focused on as a result of that, more than anything, was negotiating. It was trading. It wasn't selling. It was all about how good a deal you could get rather than could I get a deal. And I think that's something that has certainly changed over my career. But in those early days, and I don't think I appreciated it at the time, it was a pretty easy sell. It was just a tough negotiation.
So things were going along pretty nicely. And then there was this process of reviewing the franchises, and Thames ended up losing the franchise for London Weekday. That must have been an incredible shock, particularly where you were in the early stage of your career.
I think it was, yeah. It was a strange time. And again, it was early on in my career, and I don't think I've really truly understood the background to it. It's only kind of as I've kind of got older that it's since felt like more of a political decision. But look, I was relatively young. I think it was more of a shock to the senior management, the senior management who had been much further ahead in their career, all had very good big jobs in TV. I think as the kind of the team, the sales team, for us, it was just an interesting final year because the management had to keep the team in place to keep us right up until the end, because it would be quite easy for us all to have defected to the new franchise, to Carlton. So I think they did a really good job. I think only one or two people left. They managed to incentivize us through lots of different ways to stay until the end. And again, I think that really added to the team spirit through that year. And I think as a result, there's an alumni of Thames that then went on to do lots of different things, and they all spread around the industry. And you often bump into one or two of them later on in your career, and you had that kind of time together.
So you went to Sky, but within a year, you and quite a few of the Thames guys that you'd mentioned were at UK Gold. And that was from massive ITV, kind of the monopoly, to this small satellite, not even really cable, but primarily satellite TV station. Big shift.
It was, yeah. And again, a good learning experience, I think. As I said to you earlier, ITV or Thames TV wasn't a difficult sell, but setting up UK Gold from scratch into the market was a tough sell. It was a small, tiny channel that no one really heard of. Not many people were watching it, and so you had to sell. And I think that stands you in good stead for the kind of rest of your career to have that experience. But ultimately, you had to rely on the relationships that you'd built early on in your career. And I think the people who succeeded in those smaller places were the people who had successfully managed to build those relationships, because without them, you just couldn't, no one would answer the phone to you, and no one would open the door to you. So, I think that's what Nick Milligan, who set up that team, who had previously been at Thames, I think that's what he was very good at. And it's what he was looking for in people to bring with him to run UK Gold. And eventually it was UK Living. So the start of UKTV as it is today.
Quite different, quite challenging to have gone from one position to the other. And I guess you had to become more innovative and do more innovative things, like hiring Wembley and getting everyone to play football there, which has still got to be one of the great media days out, I would say.
Were you there, Danny? Were you at that day? Yeah,
I was.
Well, that was that. Yeah, you had to. I guess you just had to try and find ways of standing out as a small player. And yeah, you were right. I think at the time we'd just got the rights to show old Match of the Days on UK Gold. God, imagine that. And to kind of announce it to the market. Yeah, we arranged this fantastic football tournament at Wembley Stadium. I don't think you could do that today. it was a brilliant way of inviting lots of very senior people in the advertising industry along to events and getting your message across. But yeah, I think you had to be really creative how you open the door to advertisers and to media agencies. Is just find different interesting ways to get that message across. And that's what my memories of working at UK Gold and UK Living are, is just, again, that trying, again, it was a small team. It was about building that team spirit and camaraderie, but together just finding, right, how do we get in to see this person? How do we get into that? Because they shut the door a lot and they didn't want to see lots of people because we weren't that important. But, gradually you did it each year, and gradually we made a bit more money, and we became a bit more of a player, I guess, in that marketplace.
And then another shift in the UK TV landscape brought Channel 5, which launched in 1997. And prior to that, you moved across from Gold in 96 to help set up the sales team there alongside Nick Milligan, who you mentioned earlier. Can you talk about Nick for a bit? Because I think he was probably one of the standout TV sales executives of a generation. Really.
Yeah, I think he was. I worked for him for 16 years, actually, and he wasn't just a boss. When you work for someone for that long, he was a really good friend. I followed Nick, I guess, wherever he went. He was a real mentor to me, and you're right. He was a kind of a newer generation of sales directors, and he was a big part of changing the industry for the better. I think externally, as buyers, you probably saw him as very professional, very slick, very good on his feet, smart. And they were all true. He was also very vulnerable as well. He wasn't always like that, and I think that it was the first time, I think, with a boss that I'd actually witnessed somebody really opening up about whatever it was about anything we were working on. And I think again, I think that helps you in your career, isn't it? When you're developing your own leadership skills. I took a lot from Nick. I miss him a huge amount, and I think he was a huge loss to the industry. I think he really was a big part of. He was a big part of a generational shift in the way senior TV execs kind of behaved and how they led their teams.
Because things were quite adversarial for a long time in that trading world, and it seems like that has changed now. Was he part of that change, and has that now developed even further so that people are a lot more professional in the way that they deal with each other?
Yeah, I'd say he was the start of that change. I think it's taken a long time. I think we've come on a long way, but it certainly didn't start and finish with Nick. It started with Nick, and then I think it probably took 10, 15, maybe 20 years to really change. That aggressive confrontational trading style, that was still happening 5 years ago. It's I'd say only in recent years it's really started to move away. And interestingly, I think when I joined ITV, actually, I was employed by a lady called Fru Hasler, who had come in to run ITV, and I think she took it on even further. She'd been at ITV only 6 months, and the big, really brave, brutal thing that Fru did was completely change the senior management of ITV, and in one go. Again, I think that was another step in the direction of improving, I think, how professional, how kind of grown up TV trading has become.
So you were at Five, and Five was known as the 3 Fs: football, films, and Jeff Ford. Was there a very special culture at Five?
It was a small business. There was probably 350 people who worked at Channel 5. There's 350 people working at the sales team here at ITV. So in the whole television company. And it was run by some big personalities, Jeff being one of them. It felt like the underdog. And whenever you are the underdog, I think that again brings you together as a team. Just knits you together, doesn't it? And when Nick left, the chief exec at the time was Jane Lighting, and she could quite easily have gone out and looked for a big name to replace Nick, but didn't. Gave me an opportunity, because you need that sometimes in your career. I have a lot to thank Jane. And then when she left, Dawn Airy came back, I guess, for her second stint, the chief executive. And again, Dawn's one of those people, those wonderful bosses that properly brings people together. You know, she's fantastic to work for. So look, all throughout my career at Channel 5, and it's probably my, you know, formative years. It's the years that, you know, I was there for 15 years. It was, you know, the middle of my career, and it's probably where I got probably most of my opportunities. I've just got such fond memories of the people I work with. It was a really fun place to work. It wasn't always easy. Again, starting a channel from scratch into a crowded marketplace is challenging. And, you know, Channel 5 had its critics throughout the time I was there, but it was a really, really fun place to work.
And how did you find that step up to sales director? Was it a big leap? Was it something that felt very natural?
Well, again, as I said, Jane Lighting kind of made the decision, and she didn't just make the decision and hope for the best. You know, she put a lot of support around me from a kind of coaching perspective. She made sure our shareholders were well on board with it, RTL, who were really supportive. So when I look back at it, I was probably 37, I think, when I got put on the board of Channel 5, which is relatively young. But it didn't feel, because it's a small company and I knew it well, it didn't feel like a big step up. I really enjoyed it. And look, they worked hard to make sure that it was a pretty easy transition. You know, Nick left, and I think there was a feeling that I might leave with him because I'd kind of moved around with him. But look, Nick left to join a very established, very experienced Sky sales team. It wasn't like, you know, they were struggling, and so there's plenty of talent in that team. So it wasn't automatic that he would come and bring me with him. But I think even if he had, I think that was a moment in my career where it was, I guess, at the moment where you go, well, look, I want to try and be the leader rather than be a number two, I guess. And that was the opportunity that I was lucky enough to get and grabbed it. And so would have stayed, I think, even if he'd asked me to go with him. But he didn't. You know, as I said, there was a very, very talented, capable team at Sky.
But then there was even more management change at the very top of Channel 5, an ownership change. And somewhat around about that time, you moved to ITV. So was there a kind of a connection between the two? Did that provide the circumstances or the environment where you thought, actually, here's a chance to go back to the place that I started?
It was an interesting time because, as you're probably aware, RTL decided to sell the business, sell Channel 5, and it was a big. I think it was a big surprise to Dawn because she'd just been brought in by RTL to turn the company around. But I think we just come out of the big financial crisis, which really hit the advertising market, which really hit margins at Channel 5, and I think RTL. I think that spooked RTL. You know, running a relatively small TV station with very thin, profitability. And so they made the decision to sell. As a management, as a board, it was up to us to sell the business. So we had to do all the management presentations to all of the potential bidders. The business was sold eventually to Richard Desmond. We had this really weird evening, the day it was announced, when Dawn got us all together, got the whole board together on the Friday evening after it was announced that Richard had bought it. And she walked in and said, well, I've just spoken to Richard and he's going to let the whole board, let all of you go, except for you, Kelly, and you, Jeff Ford. We were the only two that he wanted to keep for various reasons, which was quite an emotional evening for everybody because we were a tight team. We were, good friends, and it was quite a shock, I think, to everyone, even though I think probably most people knew that it was coming. And that was on the Friday when they bought the company. On the Monday, I spent a whole day with Richard's board explaining how we made every pound of revenue. And then I spent the next day starting to work with them on all of the costs. And it was quite clear almost after day two that my role as a sales director and a board member of a television company was changing quite dramatically. Richard's kind of commercial lead was a guy called Stan Meyerson. So I was reporting into him, and I had one of those moments, I guess, where I actually, probably for the first time in my life, took a risk. And I went in, I decided, I talked to my wife and I said, look, I'm just not sure this is where I want to be because it's such a shift in my role. And there was a nice bonus if I was to leave. So it was a little bit risk-free, but So I went in the next day and I said to Stan, look, I don't think this is for me. The job's changed. You've effectively made my role redundant. I'd like to go. And he didn't want me to leave, and he tried really hard to persuade me to stay. And in the end, we agreed a deal effectively that I said, look, this was probably August. I said, we agreed that I'd stay for 6 months. I stayed to the end of January. I'd help integrate the two businesses during that period, and I'd make sure all the deals were done for the following calendar year, so they were set up, and that's what we agreed. And then the one caveat Stan said was, "But I don't want you to tell anyone that you are leaving until you leave." So I shook hands on it, and that's what we agreed to do. And I did everything I was supposed to do, and Stan and Richard honoured all their side of what they were supposed to do. Yeah, and I was kind of just getting towards Christmas, thinking, because I couldn't even look for a job because I said I couldn't say I was leaving. And then literally completely out of the blue, just before Christmas, I got a phone call from Fru Hazlitt, who had been at ITV for a few months, and she just asked for a coffee. And I thought she was just wanting to meet other TV sales directors. Had a coffee, and then she called the next day and we had lunch. And then she eventually said that she was looking to change things quite dramatically in ITV. Would I be interested? So it was complete coincidence. I think, to be honest, Richard felt that I'd played him, but if I'm not sure he will listen to this, but if he ever did listen, I didn't, Richard. It was a pure coincidence, and it worked out all right in the end. So I didn't kind of leave Channel 5 to go to ITV. I was leaving Channel 5 full stop, and it just happened to come up.
Did it feel like a homecoming to be back at ITV?
It didn't actually, Danny. It didn't. It felt like quite an amazing opportunity, because it wasn't just joining ITV. It was really trying to change ITV and modernize it and turn it into a completely different commercial proposition. So in a way, it was daunting. I guess working for a small broadcaster actually helps you understand the business of a broadcaster, because it's so small. I knew how every bit of Channel 5 worked. I was close to every executive, and for example, I knew what Jeff Ford do. I kind of knew most of the people Jeff Ford dealt with, like your good self. I kind of felt like I had a real knowledge of how a TV company works. So, but that said, ITV is a different beast. It's arguably overwhelming when you join compared to something the size of Channel 5. So it didn't feel like a homecoming. No, it felt like just an amazing opportunity to do something, quite significant and build a team from scratch effectively, build a commercial team for a big commercial beast and try and do it differently. And that's I'm still trying to do that 10 or 11 years later.
ITV recently posted record revenues. I think they're called external revenues, but they'd grown very dramatically despite the pandemic, coming in at about £3.4 billion, which is an enormous amount of money. What has been the big success point for ITV and over this period of time, and TV advertising in general, that has made it so resilient?
Of that number, 3.4 billion, I think just under 2 billion is ad revenue. And yeah, we had a fantastic year last year. I think we were up 24% on the previous year, but the previous year was tough because of COVID. But we've bounced back. We haven't just bounced back, we've bounced back, and we're way ahead of 2019. And look, I think there's lots of reasons why it's not just ITV, it's why television has done so well over the last 12 months. I think first and foremost, you've got an economy that is bursting to get back on its feet. And for most businesses, investing in that growth has been a priority. So you've got these tailwinds of a recovering economy. And equally, you've got, particularly last year, you had a number of our competitors that still hadn't recovered. The outdoor business and cinema still hadn't recovered. So we had those two tailwinds, I think, last year. But on top of that, I think there are a number of things that are happening in television. I think the pandemic itself pushed TV to be more flexible with advertisers. That flexibility has remained, and we are now much, probably from when you were buying, you had to commit 2 months before them, to commit your money 2 months before the month of transmission. You don't have to do that anymore. And that flexibility, I think, has really driven money into the market. I think advertisers have, through the pandemic, have really understood the power of telly. All the way through that crisis, television was there to inform and educate and to entertain, wasn't it, throughout that pandemic? Probably it was just a really timely reminder to a lot of advertisers of the power of TV to change people's opinions and change the way people think and feel about issues. And that's really important for brands. And that's what you're trying to do, aren't you? You're trying to influence. I think we saw this huge acceleration towards e-commerce and direct to consumer as a result of the pandemic. And that's created tons and tons of new businesses, all of whom want to scale. So the biggest growth area for television in the last 12 months has been what we call online born brands, who, again, probably a lot of them tested TV in the pandemic when our price really dropped low. And we kind of say they came for the value, but they stayed for the results, is a phrase we kind of use. And then I guess the final bit is that we're modernizing. We are becoming a digital medium. We historically, we were quite one-dimensional. We were all about mass reach, one-to-many proposition. But we now, through our online propositions, we now have huge amounts of data. We have the ability to offer addressability, much more sophisticated data-driven targeting in our digital proposition. And I think also we've become a lot more creative. One of the USPs, I guess, we have at ITV is that we probably make 75% of all the shows on the channel. And that allows us to get brands much closer to the content, really integrate those brands into shows and take them on pack or in store, or just sell that. Just because we own the IP, we can just take that IP elsewhere. So I think a combination of all those things have come together, and I don't think it's just an ITV thing at all. I think it's a TV thing. All of the broadcasters had a very good year last year. And I guess the final bit I'd say is that as an industry, I think we're collaborating better together as broadcasters. I think we all recognize that actually, yes, we'll compete like mad for viewers and for content, but everywhere else we should collaborate, because the big competition is Google and Facebook, who seem to be, so powerful and so dominant. They are the kind of the big competition for us. And I think if we're going to succeed, we probably need to collaborate more and more as an industry.
And will selling evolve? Lots of other parts of the industry, the economy, have been automated. And it occurs to me that ultimately you could just have an advertiser, via its agency or not, just saying, these are my campaign objectives, here's some money, make it happen. And a computer on the other side would just say, okay, that's great, done. And it just happens. And you wouldn't really need any people to make that work. So do people have a future in this industry?
I think they do. But I think you make a good point in that, you could absolutely see how automation will develop in any industry, but in TV. But where it's starting to develop, we now have a completely self-service programmatic platform for ITV. So you can, as a buyer now, you can buy our on-demand proposition yourself. You don't need people to book it for you. There's a platform that does it for you. I guess the difference between on-demand and linear is your on-demand buy or your on-demand sell is all about buying an audience. It's buying a number of impressions. I think whilst we still live in a world where people care, buyers and advertisers care where their advertising goes, I think we'll have humans involved. And that is the one thing that hits you right between the eyes when you come to ITV, more than anywhere else that I've worked, is God, people care where their spots go. And as I said, whilst they really do, I think people will be involved. But look, I think there will be an evolution over the next few years. But it's really easy. I'd say it's really easy to say what you just said, as in, get a computer to do this. It's actually making it happen is a lot trickier, as we're finding in the on-demand world. But we're getting there, and I wouldn't rule it out at some point in the future. But I think I'll be long gone by the time humans aren't involved in this process.
So looking back, what would you pick as a career highlight? You've been a senior exec for a long time. It could be anything, but if you had to pick one thing, what would that be?
I think it's really hard to pick one thing. Being there at the beginning when you launch new channels is a highlight. Launching UKTV, launching Channel 5. We've launched a couple of channels since I've been at ITV. Launching channels is a big thing. I think some of the events, as we discussed earlier, that you get privileged to be part of is quite something. But the thing that I always think about when I think about the highlights of my career tend to be around the team I work with, and it's moments where the team have just done amazing stuff. And we've had some great nights at the Media Week Awards over the last few years, where we've been lucky enough to win Sales Team of the Year 2 or 3 times. And those are the moments for me that stand out, when a whole year's work has ended up in the team being rewarded for doing a great job. So they're the things when I look back on my career that I remember, those moments when the team have come together and done great work.
So this is the part of the podcast where I ask my guest for their lockdown film, book, music choice, and TV box set. And at various times, this has become more or less relevant depending on how locked down we've been.
Yeah.
But let's hope that this is just purely hypothetical. But if you had to pick one from each category, what would that be in any particular order?
I'm not particularly sophisticated when it comes to movies. So look, a good gangster film for me. So probably The Godfather. I think it's a big anniversary for The Godfather recently. I think the Godfather films are probably up there for me from a film perspective. The last book I read, which I really enjoyed and I thought was hilarious, was This Is Gonna Hurt, which the BBC have just turned into a brilliant adaptation. Funny, but also hugely powerful, I think. Really powerful message behind that. So that was the last book I really, really enjoyed. I'm a big dance music fan. I've DJ'd all my life. I've spent every year in Ibiza. And so I like quite eclectic music. So there's a very old, and I say old in that he's probably pushing 70 now, but there's a guy called John Satrinksa, and he has DJ'd in Ibiza since the 70s. And he's named after a bar on a very famous beach in Ibiza, Salinas Beach. There's a bar called Satrinksa, and he creates incredibly eclectic mixes that you could probably find on SoundCloud and Mixcloud. So that would be probably my music of choice. And box set wise, the thing I just devoured recently was the Beatles documentary on Disney Plus, the thing Peter Jackson's put together. I just thought it was just an incredible piece of history. He'd restored that footage to a point where it felt like you were in the room with the Beatles as they were writing, this album, and and on it some of the biggest tracks in history, and seeing them struggling over lyrics of a song that goes on to be a classic. For me, I thought it was just incredible. So yeah, I devoured 8 hours of that in a couple of days. So that's probably be my box set.
Well, Kelly Williams, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast and for that tour de force review of your career. If I've learned nothing else from today's chat, I've learned one thing, which is at least one person knows what Jeff Ford did at Channel 5.
Thank you, Danny. Really appreciate it.